China and Iran express firm stand concerning solving the problem in Syria through a political process under a Syrian leadership. Our army units target terrorists in different areas, inflicting heavy losses upon them. German Minister of Interior stresses that German Islamic extremists have joined armed terrorist groups in Syria.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our news for today. China's permanent representative to the UN, Li Baodong, has reiterated his country's stand towards the crisis in Syria. During a UN Security Council's session last night over the situation in the Middle East, Baodong urged all parties concerned to cease fire and stop the violence on the basis of the Geneva Statement as soon as possible and start dialogue under a Syrian leadership. Baodong also called for measures to be taken to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He expressed hope that conflicts be solved through negotiations on the basis of relevant UN resolutions and the land in return for peace principle that would ultimately lead to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. The Chinese representative urged the Israeli occupation authorities to lift the siege imposed on Gaza, calling on the world community to play a constructive role in realizing a comprehensive and permanent peace in the Middle East. During the same session, Iran's permanent representative Mohammad Khuzai said the Syrian crisis should be solved through enhancing the political and peaceful options with a view of stopping the violence and starting a comprehensive national dialogue between the opposition and the Syrian government. Khuzai said Iran believed that any foreign military intervention in Syria would escalate the crisis, spread tension to other regional states and feed up extremism, sectarianism and terrorism. In his capacity as chairman of the Coordinative Center of the Non-Aligned Movement, Khuzai expressed the movement's concern over the violation of the 1974 agreement on the occupied Syrian Golan. He affirmed the movement's call on the Zionist entity to implement Resolution 497 on full withdrawal from the occupied Syrian Golan. The Russian Foreign Ministry has announced that Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, the Special Envoy to the Middle East, Mikhail Bogdanov, will discuss during his visit to Lebanon, due to start today, the Russian diplomacy's efforts to solve the crisis in Syria. In a statement, the ministry said Bogdanov will brief Lebanese officials on the Russian viewpoint regarding the developments of the situation in the Middle East. Bogdanov had discussed with Iranian officials in Tehran the Syrian issue. Both sides stressed that the solution should be reached through dialogue among the Syrians themselves, away from foreign intervention. A military source at the Russian Black Sea Fleet has announced that floating workshop BM-138 has set out for the Mediterranean. It added that the workshop started to head towards the Bosphorus with a group of the counter-terrorism Black Sea Fleet naval infantry on board. The source said that the floating workshop BM-138 under the command of Alexander Kashalabi will replace workshop BM-56 at Tartus harbor. The latter has been at the harbor for months, carrying out maintenance work for the Russian fleet's vessels that has been on military drills in the Mediterranean.
In Damascus countryside, our armed forces targeted gatherings of terrorists south of Deir Atiyeh near Tel Dakwa and Abu Shamat areas, killing dozens of them and destroying their vehicles and equipment. Meanwhile, our army units today killed and wounded several terrorists and destroyed their hideouts and equipment as they pursued armed groups in several areas in Damascus suburbs. The army killed 5 terrorists west of the Grand Mosque in Jobar and others who perpetrated acts of looting at Harmille Tunnel between Jobar and Zamalka. An army unit has also killed the members of a terrorist group called Omar al-Mukhtar Battalion in Barzel Balad. Another army unit destroyed a terrorist hideout that contained weapons and ammunition in a building in the neighborhood. Also in Damascus suburbs, the army has put under its full control al-Atayba village in eastern Ghouta after destroying terrorist hideouts and weapons. Al-Atayba had been a base for the armed terrorist groups from which they received their smuggled weapons. During the operation, the army seized ammunition, explosive devices and stolen medicines. Tunnels were found which the terrorists used in their crimes. German Minister of Interior Hans-Peter Friedrich said that Islamic extremists are taking part in the fighting in Syria alongside the terrorist groups. In an interview with the German Der Spiegel newspaper, Friedrich pointed out that Germany is quite concerned that those terrorists might pose a threat to Germany. The German minister added that some jihadists who were under surveillance in his country have traveled to Syria to join fighting there, adding that Germany is following the developments with great concern, especially with regard to calls for sending more jihadists to Syria. The EU coordinator for terrorism affairs had revealed earlier that more than 500 Europeans had joined the terrorist groups in Syria. Fierce confrontations erupted among students in a Turkish university, causing the injury of 15 people. Turkish media sources pointed out that the confrontations lasted for hours before Turkish authorities were able to assume control on the scene, using tear gas to disperse the students who pelted police vehicles with stones. Finally, Iran renewed its commitment to nuclear non-proliferation treaty, calling on the 5+1 group to show seriousness in its negotiations with Iran over its peaceful nuclear program. Iran's attitude was expressed by Iran's Deputy Secretary General for National Security, Ali Bagheri, who stressed in a statement that EU Coordinator for Foreign Affairs, Catherine Ashton, did not convey the response of the 6 major countries on the proposal submitted by Iran many weeks ago after pledging to do so. With this, we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. Now to latest business and market news with Khalid Saqabani after a short break.
Prime Minister Dr. Wael Halaqi affirmed that the government exerted all the efforts to provide all the people's needs, pointing out that the government is still supporting the essential materials and the oil byproducts, in addition to all the people who were affected by the acts of the terror groups. The Prime Minister also highlighted that the current crisis caused the high transportation costs, monopolies, and that this is why the prices in the markets went up. He also announced that the government is providing all of the farmers' needs, that they are exerting all the efforts possible to solve the problems, especially those related to the extra olive and citric products through the agreements with some countries to market those crops. Meanwhile, al-Halaqi affirmed that the health sector is coherent even though that the terrorist groups have targeted more than 34 hospitals and 168 health centers, pointing out that the medications for the chronic diseases are imported from the friendly countries. The Minister of Oil has affirmed that the ministry will take the needed measures to prevent the oil from being looted through monitoring the oil wells. During his meeting with the directors of the oil companies and the establishments, they discussed that the products that should be the procedures that should be taken for preserving the oil sector and the mineral resources from all of the acts of the terrorist groups after the decision of the European Union, which allows purchasing the Syrian oil from the so-called armed opposition. The Minister of Electricity said that the ministry's maintenance department is fixing what has been vandalized by the armed terrorist groups. The minister asserted that the maintenance department returned the power in 15 Syrian villages. He also pointed out that the work in al-Zabadani towns and other areas started yesterday.
قرى ومناطق وبلدات وكان آخرها بدأنا البارحة بمدينة سوق وادي غردة والزبداني لإعادة التأهيل.
The Directorate of the Plant Production Department asserted that the total area cultivated with wheat reached about 1.5 million hectares during February. The ministry also asserted that it provided the cotton seeds to Al-Raqqa and Deir az-Zur in addition to Al-Hasaki. On the other hand, the ministry added that the Agricultural Cultivated Bank is working on providing the necessary production needs to the farmers, especially the fertilizers. The American spot crude was little changed near the highest closing level in 2 weeks after the American gasoline stockpiles and the fuel demand are down in the world's largest consumer. Futures also paired an earlier increase as much as 0.6%. The American future index was a little changed. The European stocks were also a little changed after a 4-day rally. The Japanese shares, on the other hand, were up as the Nikkei index advanced for a second day in its highest since 2008. Gold climbed for the 7th day in the 8th days as it rebounded from the highest slump during 3 days, as the internal banks have also upped the low exchange products and the holdings of the gold for June delivery, and these are up as much as 0.9%. The yen strengthened for the first time in 3 days against the dollar as the Japanese investors cut their holdings for the overseas bonds for a 6-week. It is to be noted that Japan's currency is up versus 13 of its 16 major counterparts. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our news bulletin for today. Thank you for joining us.